Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Christian Underground Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Sheehan. Just want to thank everybody for coming and joining us today. I am super excited about tonight's guest. We have been talking back and forth, been trying to reschedule, all this good stuff, but it is a wonderful opportunity. I have with me the author of Cruel Logic, the philosopher killer, Mr. Brian Godawa, and I'm going to go ahead and pull him up on the screen. Hey, Brian, how you doing?
Hey, Joseph. Great to be here. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
It is my honor to have you on this show. Absolutely. This has been something that I've been looking forward to ever since you agreed to do this show. I'm a huge fan. I have been ever since I saw you for the first time or actually heard you for the first time. I believe it was on Paranormal. Am I being correct?
Yeah, with Dr. Heiser when he was still with us.
Yes.
Late Dr. Heiser. What a bummer. I hate to say that.
Yeah, me too. But you know what? The day that I found out he passed away, the thing that gave me such excitement was, for him, it's no longer an unseen realm.
Yeah.
So he's going to get to know what he got right and what he got wrong.
Yeah, because there will be things he got wrong.
Yes, and he would be the first to admit that.
Yeah, I always wanted to tell him, well, when you get up there, you'll finally be a Calvinist and a preterist. That's my heresy.
Well, maybe
because he was so anti-Calvinist and stuff. So
yeah, well, matter of fact, I'm actually reading some of his eschatological stuff that he wrote about, and yeah, he's not a fan of the preterism for sure. You were saying though.
Yeah, actually, he seemed to have a somewhat of an antipathy towards preterism, but interestingly, he had preterist views. For instance, in Ezekiel, it was very much preterist of the eschatological temple, and he even had. I remember listening to me. He had another fellow theologian that was a friend of his on a show, and this guy, they're talking in the midst of their talking, and he's talking about Matthew 24, and this guy was a preterist, and Mike was. I don't know. He didn't challenge him, but I mean, he definitely, the guy made great points, and I can't, if he disagreed, he didn't voice his opinion. But I think that I find that in eschatology, that's a very emotional and explosive sort of thing to talk about with people, and it's very polarizing, and so. People tend to be extremes, and they don't realize they're not as extreme as they think they are. For example, the very thing that preterism is this, has a general negative reputation because the dominant sort of premillennial left behind sort of viewpoint, people don't realize that it's just a recent viewpoint, and just because it's a dominant one and it's dying out, but they don't realize that actually preterism is a really old view, and a lot of scholars have it. And in fact, every Christian is a preterist to a certain degree, because preterism is basically the belief that a prophecy has been fulfilled in the past. Preterist means in Latin past. And so all Christians are preterists when it comes to Messiah coming, right? And the atonement of sins. So in a very real sense, it's just a question of how much and what. So the real issue is just which prophecies have been fulfilled and which ones haven't. And just because you disagree with one person that you think the prophecy is in the future, but they argue in the past, doesn't make them the heretic. You may actually be the heretic, and we need to be more humble about about interacting in that realm of Bible prophecy, because a lot of Christians don't realize how in fact, I know Heiser talked about this sometimes too. They don't realize how frail their systems really are and how many holes there are in all the systems. I think part
Yeah.
of humility begins with recognizing I have a viewpoint and that's great, but I could be wrong, or I have holes. If you don't know about any holes in your viewpoint, you don't know very much about Bible eschatology. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, Paul, I believe it's Romans 14 where he talks about that if there's a disagreement, among brothers is, have the humility and have the love to say, pray for your brother if he's in error, but also pray for yourself if you're in error, and
Yeah,
that
yeah,
your heart
exactly.
will change if you're in error.
Absolutely.
And that's the way I have about it too. Growing up in the Assemblies of God and in the Catholic Church, which don't get me started on that, because my dad was Catholic, my
What a
mom
combo.
was. Oh, it gets better. I went to a Southern Baptist school, so
Oh, great. No, actually, that's probably a really good thing. A lot of
it really
ecumenical
did.
experience for you. Yeah.
It was, and I think that's probably largely one of the reasons why I have a very ecumenical viewpoint when it comes. I feel at home in any church. I really do.
Yeah.
I can go to a Catholic mass and feel at home, and I can go to a Southern Baptist, fundamental Baptist, Methodist, and I toured the country briefly with my stepdad who sang Southern gospel music. I was the sound man for his group, and we would sing in every kind of church. And so I always felt at home everywhere we went just because of that experience. But, one of the things that I didn't recently start getting involved in really thinking about eschatology, until I got really serious about studying my Bible. And you can't get around that topic.
Yeah.
And I just know that it challenged a lot of my presuppositions, or my suppositions, in that, I I realized what I was raised in, because
Yeah.
in the Catholic Church, that there's a coming of the Lord, but you don't really talk about it that much. But in the
No.
Assemblies of God, it is very much
Everything. Yeah.
premillennial, pre-tribulational. I mean, it's very much that regard. And I just, and I grew up, I remember my mom and I read the Left Behind series. We read it from book one all the way to the last book. I watched the first movie, and then when I really started studying the word and started studying the things, I started realizing there's a lot of things that I hold as a believer that aren't in this Bible,
No.
and or that I'm not reading. And then I had some friends of mine who were preterists, and Calvinists, who really started challenging me
Hmm.
on particular beliefs, and where I was, and they started pointing me towards. That's actually how I found the Naked Bible podcast. That's actually how I found
Oh,
this podcast world and found you, is through these guys. And I would say, in that topic of eschatology, I am probably more like, I'm probably becoming more like Mike, in that, I
it's kind of like,
really
I was going to
go
say,
ahead.
it's sort of like when you know so much about all the sides and you realize, and they're so drastically different. And you realize that over time, we really haven't been able to, nobody's kind of risen to the surface. It's just more arguments on all sides. And I can see the tendency to conclude, because I have been there myself, that, well, what's the point? Because nobody has ever agreed and nobody's ever agreeing. And so why not focus on things where we can agree, or we'll never know anyway. So why bother? I
Mhm.
mean, I actually got to the point where I'm like, I don't even care about Bible prophecy because it's all just people making claims and none of them come true, number one. And
Mhm.
people keep changing everything and people keep arguing. So I got to the point where it's sort of like, God, I don't know why you did this, but it certainly is so unclear that no one's rising to the top, really. And
Mhm.
so I sort of pulled away from it. But I've since sort of done a 180, well, a 360 maybe,
Mhm.
where I realized that, yeah, if you know anything about Bible prophecy, you know that there are a lot of viewpoints, all within Orthodox, and a lot of viewpoints within Orthodox Christianity,
Mhm.
and it requires a certain kind of humility to be able to discuss, to talk with each other.
Mhm.
And it's okay to have a strong convictions, but listen, I hear a lot of this condemning and this heresy calling and stuff. It's like, it's really divisive in the body of Christ.
Hmm.
But when I had to face the fact, yeah, but not just the book of Revelation, but I mean, the book of Revelation is significant enough, but we're talking Daniel and we're talking lots of other, Bible prophet. God considers it important enough that it's in
Hmm.
there. And if we don't make it important because he made it important, then we're not giving honor to God's word either. So
Hmm.
I'm back to realize or believing that we should really pursue prophecy and understand what it means,
Hmm.
but it is a qualified in the sense of, but this is an area that's it's not simple. It's not easy. For some Christians, they think it is because they're simple minded. But
Hmm.
if you really study the issues, you go, no matter what view you have, you should be able to say, yeah, but it's complex and it requires debate. And I need to be willing to have these discussions with people, have my strong convictions, but be willing
Hmm.
to listen and talk because it's not, we don't have the certainty that we would like to have.
Hmm.
So that's where it's like I kind of came back around where it's like, you know what? Like I think it's bad if a church doesn't address it at all. I realize why they don't oftentimes because they don't want the divisiveness that often occurs. Churches split over this stuff, right? And I get it
Hmm.
and I understand it, but it's like, yeah, but God put it there, so we should at least try to understand it. We should spend some energy, but in so doing, we should do it graciously and with a lot of caution, and that I don't see a lot of that these days. I see prophetic proclamations with certainty where,
Yeah.
this would be on the level of, Old Testament. In the Old Testament, they'd be executed for the claims they're making these days, right?
Yeah.
But the level in which people are proclaiming against each other in the church, it breaks my heart because it's so divisive
I
in,
agree.
in a
I
way that it
agree.
shouldn't be, in a way that it shouldn't be.
Absolutely. And, with my background, with my ecumenical background and things like that, it breaks my heart. And I know it breaks the Lord's heart to see that his church and see that his body is so divided over something that even he's very clearly said, only I really know the truth about this.
Mm-hmm.
And we can have ideas and we can have, but one of the things that has always bothered me is like, well, I have a more positive viewpoint of the gospel because I have XYZ eschatology. And I go, well, you know what? I, I've lived in all the worlds and I know, and I've been with all the people, and I know that they all have a very positive background. Just because one believes that the end of the world is going to look really horrible doesn't mean that it's not a positive viewpoint. But at the same time, I also like the idea of the church militant, the church going
Sure.
out, the church subduing the earth, and that's one of the
Yeah.
things that we do talk about here on the Christian Underground podcast is that we just started a series on spiritual warfare, and one of the things that we talk about is and in this and again, this is a big influence that Mike had on me, is the greatest spiritual warfare that we have is the Great Commission.
Yeah.
Going and taking,
Amen.
having
Amen.
that divine counsel worldview, having that Deuteronomy 32:8-9 worldview, where we are now taking the gospel and we're taking the church and we're taking dominion in the name of Christ. And I just think that whatever your eschatology is, that should be your worldview. Because that's why Christ came, was
I
to
agree.
not only.
I agree. At least you should have a positive view of the power of God's kingdom.
Yes,
It's like,
yes.
if you're going to have a Christianity that you think is just going to fail on every level, it's just like, really, if you're going to believe that the world's going to go to hell in a handbasket, that's fine. But like, don't you going to believe what God says too? Where he goes, this kingdom will crush all other kingdoms,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
kind of thing. But we're not here to talk about eschatology today, are
No,
we?
we're not. No, no, no. We are here to talk about your book. And your book is Cruel Logic, the Philosopher Killer, excuse me. I'll learn to speak English one day. And I will tell you, you sent this book to me, and honestly, I highly recommend my listeners go out and buy this book. Okay. You will enjoy it. You will enjoy the story. But not only that, what's really great about this book is it's sneaky. I like that. I like that it's sneaky. I love that you're sneaking in that Christian worldview, and you're doing so with an apologetic that approaches the image of God, approaches the value of the human life, that approaches, I mean, it's really good stuff. So I'm gonna let you give the listener and give the viewer a bit of a 30,000 view of your story, if you want.
Sure. The log line of or the pitch of the book is that Cruel Logic is about a serial killer on a woke college campus. And what he does is he captures university professors and he debates with them. And he videotapes the debates. And the topic of his debate is his moral right to kill them. So he'll be talking to some professor of, I've got all kinds of professors in there, whether it's queer theorists or evolutionary biologists or what have you. I just have professors, and he'll ask them, he'll say, look, if what you say is true about reality, then give me one valid reason, one logically valid reason, because our killer, the serial killer, happens to have been a philosophy professor. So he says, if what you think is true about reality, give me one valid reason why I should not kill you, and I'll let you go. And of course, each professor struggles to do so. And not to reveal too much, but they don't do very well in attempting to provide a proper moral foundation for their beliefs. And of course, he's not just out making some generic point like that. He's being hunted down by a cop who had previously caught him, and the psychologist who had declared him insane, and he had been put in actually a hospital for the criminally insane, and he had escaped it. And so these guys are hunting him down at the same time. And so he's also sort of has a beef with those two guys. And then the cop and the psychologist have their own inner demons that they're struggling with. But one of the it's not just a thriller like that. It's, I've always been inspired by Silence of the Lambs and the movie Seven, with Brad Pitt. Those have always been
What's in the box?
Yeah, it wasn't in the box. Oh man, it was so amazing.
What's in the box?
Sorry. Yeah, so I've always been inspired by that. In other words, I want to write intelligent thrillers. Of course, I call these theological thrillers because I want people to understand that, look, I want to do I'm come from Hollywood, so I want to write an entertaining novel just as much as anybody else. And I won't write a scene unless it's entertaining in some way. I'll cut it out if it ain't, right? But nevertheless, I like the thriller genre because it inherently wrestles with the issues that I think are very important to me and this world, which is the issues of evil and the existence of God, as well as human nature and our what is human nature like? Really, is it evil? Is it good? That kind of thing. Wrestling with these questions that I think are at the heart and soul of civilization, and they are among the most important questions to ask. I think personally the most important question to ask is there a living God? That kind of thing. But wrapped up in that is this morality, because it's morality upon which foundations are built as well. And so I want to wrestle with those issues, and I want to wrestle with them unashamedly, because I think that that's what the thrillers are really about. So I've always loved philosophy. And, to be fair, I've also loved Christian apologetics. And that's how I've learned a lot about my Christian faith, was through apologetics. But I've always loved the notion of philosophy and the foundations of our beliefs, because I want to know what's the meaning of life. I want to know what's it all worth and why. And how do we know anything's true? And all these things we claim, whether, war is wrong to global climate change is bad, and all these things. How do we know we're right about what we're saying, right? So, so I like to wrestle with those kinds of issues. And this, but I realized that philosophy in particular, which is one of my personal pet interests, not a lot of people are interested in philosophy, and it's certainly boring to most people, right? So I found that, I thought this would be a way that would make philosophy interesting again, and entertaining to people. But it's not just a gimmick, because I was actually inspired originally by many, many years ago. Because see, this Cruel Logic originally started out as a movie script. And I was
Mm.
trying to get it made in Hollywood. And I won a lot of awards with it as a script, but I could never get it made. And so I finally got the opportunity to put it into a book. But a lot of things have changed since I first wrote it as a script. But I was originally inspired years ago by listening to one of my old favorite apologists, Christian apologists of the past. His name was the late Walter Martin. And he was
Mm.
this older guy, rascally guy. I loved him. He had a good sense of humor, but he's also strong and aggressive. And he was on this the Long John Nebel show. I remember listening to it on tape. And he was talking about how he was trying to explain to an atheist, that you don't have a foundation for your morality. And what are you talking about? The atheist would say, I believe in moral right and wrong. I believe murder's wrong or whatever. He would say, yeah, I know you believe that, but you don't have a basis for it in your atheism. There's no foundation, to justify your belief that there's objective transcendent morality. And atheists are not very good about thinking about their thinking. They think, but they don't think about their thinking much. And what that means is, if you're going to be proposing these, truth claims, you have to have a foundation that in your worldview that justifies it. So if you're going to claim there's moral right and wrong that's objectively apart from our own personal feelings and thoughts, then you're going to have a worldview that accounts for that. And atheism does not. Anyway, he was debating with the atheist, and he got so frustrated that the atheist couldn't think clearly about his own thinking that he just said, he thought of an example. He said, okay, it's 1940s Germany. I'm a Nazi with a gun pointing at your head and you're a Jew. Give me one reason why I shouldn't kill you. And of course, as you could see how clearly that was very much the genesis of my story, but that was from decades ago. And obviously I never forgot it, because it really, to me, I thought, wow, that really does capture the essence, because so many atheists, so many unbelievers just love spouting their arguments and criticizing and attacking. Christianity is a fairy tale, all this stuff. They love making proclamations, but they're never held to account, right, for what they believe. And what if what if your life depended on it? Could you defend your beliefs if your life depended on it, right? And that never left me, and obviously that became the foundation of Cruel Logic. But there's another component to the novel that has sort of become more part of the story as well. There's kind of two storylines going on. There's that thriller line, and then there's the story of an evangelical Christian who goes to college as a freshman for the first time in California. And he's just a typical evangelical Christian, and he goes to the school, and he gets caught up in the social justice movement and gets sucked into a dangerous network of radical activism that is the kind of stuff that is going on today on college campuses. And I wanted to sort of, there's a lot of talk these days on podcasts, particularly about Christians who've lost their faith, and they call it Christian deconstruction or Christian deconversion, right? Now, this is obviously not a new thing, because Christians have been losing their faith from the beginning. And when I went to college, Christians lost their faith too. But there's just been a particular focus lately because of podcasting. You hear a lot of these celebrities, a lot of Christian musicians, Christian pastors, and people go to college, and they're describing how they lost their faith. And none of it's new, of course, but that's the term they give it. And I thought, you know what? I wanted to explore with an honest sort of realistic wrestling with this issue of, why is it? What does it take to make a Christian lose their faith like that? What is their faith based on? And what is that process like? And so I wanted to deal with that. And the two issues are not dissimilar, because one of the heroes, one of the protagonists of my story, Joseph Callinger, he's the psychiatrist, and he is sort of like a Jordan Peterson character. I've been fascinated by what's going on in today's world with there's this sort of movement of people who are not Christians, and many of them are atheists, but they believe in Western civilization and they're defending it. And a lot of it is in the name of free speech, Fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of them
Mm-hmm.
are supporting Western civilization and even Judeo-Christianity as a positive thing, even though they don't believe in it. So you've got
Mm-hmm.
Douglas Murray, who's like one of my favorite, political commentators, Jordan Peterson. You've got Heather McDonald, you've got Tom Holland, who's a historian, and all these people
Mm-hmm.
are fighting for Western Civ. And that's also an issue that's been going on in colleges for a long time as well. And so I have my character who's sort of like a similar to Jordan Peterson, where he's doing that
Mm-hmm.
same thing. He's defending Western civilization on campus while everyone's coming after him. So it's this mixture of like, the one of the themes of the novel is ideas have consequences. And what's wrapped up in that is when you give up on God in society, and particularly Western civilization was founded on Judeo-Christianity as in its mythology, as well as some of the Enlightenment. Fair enough, there's a mixture there, but it's heavily rooted in Judeo-Christian worldview. When you give that up, what is the consequences, right? And I would argue that ultimately the serial killer is the apex of that system, and if he can get away with it, there's nothing wrong with him whatsoever. But nevertheless, I wanted to deal with it realistically. So this is not a book where you've got straw men, caricatures. I literally footnoted some of the events in my book because they're so crazy that people would think, oh, he's just making that up. And I'm like, no, I'm not making it up. This stuff is really happening. It's Sex Week and all this stuff that's going on campuses. I wanted people to see, and I wanted to have characters that were genuine. Like when you write, in order to write a good story, you as an author, even though you have a particular point of view, you still seek to do. You're writing different characters who have different beliefs about the world, and they're all conflicting, and that's the nature of drama, right? Well, the theme or the meaning of the story is what comes out of that, who wins, so to speak, and what happens to the consequences of the way these people approach life. And that's very much worldview thinking. But to be a good story, you have to be fair to all the viewpoints. You have to show the best version of those viewpoints. So I seek to make the best arguments from opposing viewpoints that I don't even agree with. I don't believe in this caricatures and straw men and all that kind of stuff because I'm not interested in propaganda, right? So that's sort of the genesis of the project and sort of the big picture, the themes I'm wrestling with, and yet at the same time, trust me when I say, again, I come from Hollywood. I've been, writing movies for decades. I want to be entertaining because I don't think you can hold people's attention unless you're entertaining. And if you can't hold their attention, what good does all the truth you have in the world? All right. There's a balance there, right? There's a balance of keeping it entertaining, but also being able to like I say, my favorite term I think is wrestle. I think of the story of Jacob and the angel, but wrestling with issues, which means being honest about them, about the good and the bad of your own viewpoint even, and trying to show, okay, where does this stuff really lead? So that's kind of the heart and soul of Cruel Logic.
Well, and I think, when you mentioned Jordan Peterson, I was actually going to ask you if he was the model for the professor, because it comes across that way.
To some degree, sure. Like I have a speech in there that he gives to the incoming freshmen where I did draw. I mean, I love the way Jordan Peterson speaks, man. And I think that's an interesting character, right? But it's not like I wouldn't say like this is Jordan Peterson, because there's a lot that's different. He's a Jewish guy for one thing. He's a Jew who's given up his Jewish faith, but nonetheless, So what I was more interested in was more the bigger movement of people like Jordan. Like I said, Douglas Murray and such. And so in other words, it's not just one person, but there's a mentality out there, and that's a real thing, and that's a good thing. And I want to understand what's going on with that mentality, and especially because I think, well, how can you be supporting a religious belief for good of society that you don't actually believe in or agree with? And what does that do to your own cognitive dissonance, right? And so I wanted to struggle with that in my characters as well. So yeah, I mean, let's put it this way. I draw from Jordan Peterson, I draw from Douglas
Hmm.
Murray, I draw from these guys, but
Hmm.
no, I don't seek to make them. This is that guy, you know.
Right, right. Well, and like I said, it doesn't come across that way, but when you're reading it, you're thinking about him.
The
You're
resonance is
thinking,
there.
well, because especially for people who've maybe been a fan of Jordan while he was going through what he went through at Oxford, just for having the audacity to disagree with the transgender movement,
Yeah, yeah.
is something that's there. But also too, I'd love to ask you about Cullen, because I okay,
The
so
killer,
yeah, the killer. Thank you. The serial killer
Charles
is
Cullen.
Charles Cullen. Charles Cullen. Okay. And I will be honest with you, the image that you have on the back of your book did color the way I saw that character. Largely
That's okay. I mean,
because
that is honestly
yeah.
how I envisioned him.
Yeah, yeah, and it comes across that way. I mean, but what I loved about him was, I mean, he really did a great job throwing their arguments back in their face, you know, challenging the the foundation of their arguments when they would try to give, and again, I don't want to give any spoilers away, because again, I want you guys to go out there and buy this book, um, because I really think you'll enjoy it and you'll learn, and when you can enjoy learning, that's a good thing. But I just love, okay, I'm a fan of serial killer books, the genre.
Yeah,
You were talking about that, this is a great medium. Thrillers are a great medium for this. And it's true because a lot of people don't realize that the most enjoyable Christian films that are out there, even though the genre itself has a bad name, are horror films. A
yeah,
lot of
I
people
would
don't realize.
agree.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. They don't.
yeah,
Yeah. One of the best horror films that I felt had one of the most biblical messages was The Exorcism of Emily Rose.
agree.
And because and it's kind of the same thing. You have a prosecuting attorney, you have a defense attorney. The defense attorney is defending a priest who a girl died during an exorcism, and the Bible believing prosecuting attorney is having to prove that there's no God, and the atheist.
Or shall we say, no? He's trying to prove that it was not demonic; it was
Right.
psychological. He does
Yes,
believe in
right.
God, but he's arguing against the demons. Yeah,
Right. And which you can tell he's conflicted in that, which and the
yeah,
actor in that is absolutely great. But and then of course he's going against Laura Linney, who is a tour de force all herself. I love Laura Linney. I always have.
yeah,
And she's having to argue for a God she doesn't believe in. And what's really great is at the same exact time she's going through that, she's starting to experience things that she doesn't believe exist.
yeah, yeah.
And I just
Exactly. Well, that,
and I
by
love
the way,
that.
that's a common notion in a lot of demonic horror films. Is the
Hmm.
skeptic who's a scientist and they don't believe in spirits, and
Hmm.
that's a trope. That's what we call a trope, and there's nothing wrong
Hmm.
with that because that think about that's the essence of if you want to have diff all different viewpoints approaching an issue. If the issue is demons, you got to have the person who I don't believe it, and many
Hmm.
people don't. Maybe you could even say most people don't. They've never
Hmm.
seen anything like that, right? So yeah, absolutely. Well, the original
Yeah.
Exorcist was very similar to that
Yes.
too, and
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
there's a lot of those. A lot of those movies. The other one that's made by the same director, by the way, which is
Mhm.
"Deliver Us from Evil," and that was,
Yes.
that was where a cop is hunting down a killer who's supposedly demon possessed, but the cop in
Yes.
this case is actually a apostate, a Christian who's given up on his faith, and
Hmm.
another good approach to that.
Hmm.
Um, I think that in a very real sense too, that the serial killer um, is the modern day like Frankenstein, vampire.
Hmm.
He embodies the modern version of the the monster,
Mm, mm,
in a
mm,
good way, in the
mhm,
sense
mhm,
that, it's more updated in a sense, right?
mhm,
But also I think that he becomes the medium through which you can explore the notion of morality, because there really
mhm,
are people who are sociopathic or pathological, who don't believe in moral right and wrong. They don't have that sense about them.
mhm,
And how do you, as a person who believes in that, how do you cope with that? How do you deal with that? How do you
mhm.
answer that? How do you address that? So, yeah,
Well,
this
and I
was
think
an it. Oh, go ahead.
I think in Cruel Logic you do a very good job with that, because the and again I don't want to give away any spoilers, so but how you juxtapose his desire to be free and yet his desire not to be considered mentally incompetent
Yeah. So that's the
is
classical
right.
issue
Hmm.
right,
Hmm.
is insanity. Is he insane or is
Hmm.
he evil, right? And again, that's
Hmm.
another trope, but
Hmm.
it's a legitimate trope. And I actually, in my book, I try to bring in all the viewpoints. Like I said, the best of all viewpoints, insanity, just pure evil, demonic, or whatever. I try to actually present all those possibilities within the story, because they're real. They're. It's
Hmm.
interesting that we're all familiar with the not guilty by reason of insanity plea, right? But what
Hmm.
many people don't realize is that in more recent years there has been a new um, diagnosis that is interesting, because the not guilty by reason of insanity is, the consequence of that is the person doesn't go to prison, they go to a state hospital, which is a prison, but it's actually much more looser. It's not
Hmm.
stringent, it's
Hmm.
not as restrictive,
Hmm.
actually. So in a way, that's
Hmm.
the worst place to put a killer, right? But and then when they're declared healthy, then they can leave. But if you go to prison, you have to fulfill your sentence, right? So that's what people hate about the not guilty by reason of insanity. But there's a
Hmm.
new formulation that's called, I don't remember the technical term now. It's in the novel. I should, right?
Oh
Guilty.
yeah.
It's actually guilty, but I don't think they don't use the word insane anymore. But guilty,
Mm-mm.
but mentally um,
Let's see if I can find
mentally
it.
deranged or something like that. Yeah,
Yeah,
look,
yeah.
do a
I'll see if I
search
can
for
find it.
guilty. I should know that, I'm
Yeah.
the author, right? See, I'm already working on my
Right.
next novel.
Right.
I've already forgotten this. But the point there is, they're admitting, okay, this person has moral guilt, because the whole premise of insanity is, well, he doesn't know the difference between right and wrong, so how can he be
Hmm.
guilty of it, right? So he's not
Hmm.
guilty, right? But there's an acceptance and an understanding now. No, you can be, you can know what's right and wrong, but still do it, right?
Hmm.
But your mental competence or your mental capacity is your incapacity to some degree for whatever reason, right? So it's sort of like saying guilty but insane, right? And
Right.
what
Right.
that does
Right.
is that allows them to say, okay, yeah, you do have these problems, but you're going to go to prison and you're not going to
Hmm.
get out. Or I'm sorry, no, what it becomes is, yes, you go to the state hospital,
Hmm.
but as soon as you're declared sane, then you go
Yeah.
to prison to fulfill your sentence. And at least
GB
what was it?
GBMI GBMI guilty but
What
mentally ill.
That's it. Guilty but mentally ill. That's a legit. That's an actual legal
Hmm.
term.
Hmm.
Oh boy, I'm bad. I got to know that term. Guilty but mentally ill. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, that was another issue that I wanted to just sort of, again, wrestle with in the story. And do I come down on any particular side? You'll have to read it to see. My interest is in dealing with the whole moral issue, and so I wanted to deal with all the components:
Yeah.
guilt, non-guilt, insane, not insane, all these issues, foundational beliefs for morality, all that kind of stuff.
Another direction you went with the book, which I enjoyed, was Danny and Shonda.
Shavanda.
Shavonda. Okay, Danny and Shavonda. Okay, and for those of you who are going to read, Danny is the evangelical youth that's going to college, and
Be
Shavonda
careful how
is
far you go with this.
okay, but Shavonda is his love interest. Let's just
Yeah.
say that. Okay. And I
And she's
loved
the one that sort of draws him into the social
mhm.
justice.
Right, right. And so, which I love that she's kind of like that siren,
Yeah.
that siren element where she's leading him into the rocks, and she's leading him into that worldview, and she's like the Medusa type character. She's bringing him to his, to his ultimate climax. And but I also love that you dealt with, I mean, what I loved in the book too, and again, I'm not going to go into it, but I loved how you dealt with how he turned, how he dealt with his
Yeah.
issues, how he,
Yes.
you know, I loved that had, he had joy, and then he, as and it just the night and day picture of him, his full embracing of what he's discovering, just all that type of stuff
Yeah. And
is.
again, this is something that I wanted to be fair with, and I wanted to
Mhm,
to show the best version of it, because so many Christians are getting sucked up into DEI, right?
mhm,
Diversity, equity, and
mhm,
inclusion, and the whole woke mentality. And that happens for a reason. And it's not, you can't
mhm,
just say, well, because they're all evil, they're not really Christians, or something stupid like that. No, there's a reason why something. And I think part of the appeal is Christianity is based on seeking compassion and forgiveness,
mhm,
right? And
mhm,
and
mhm,
understanding and acceptance of the sinner, right, or acceptance of other people. And so
mhm,
it makes sense that they would be sensitive and willing to listen to a, though manipulative as it may be, a
mhm,
claim for helping oppressed minorities, right?
mhm,
That
mhm,
appeals to our compassion, and there's some truth in every lie. So again, diversity, equity, inclusion is the dominant worldview in the university, and I bring that out. And it's not 100% evil, right? Every lie
mhm,
always has some truth in it. And
mhm,
again, that was my goal, was to depict it accurately. I didn't want to
mhm,
depict these
mhm,
people like snidely whiplash people, try the evil whip
mhm.
people. It's like, no, 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 no. There's a reason
Yeah.
why there's a reason. It's not all bad that draws people
Mhm,
to this stuff,
mhm,
and like I said, I want to portray it accurately because it's really going on in this world, and our
mhm,
institutions have really been captured by this. And to
mhm,
me, it's almost shocking, because it's when you look into DEI and you see how evil it really is. On the surface, it's like, well, wait, shouldn't we be inclusive? Shouldn't we be
mhm,
diverse?
mhm,
Shouldn't we be
mhm,
equitable? It's like, well, yeah, those
mhm,
are all code words for that actually mean the opposite.
mhm,
It actually means non-diversity. It actually means
mhm.
um, uh, oh, I came up with a term for it. Where it's like the opposite of everything. So it's
Yeah.
actually exclusive. It's actually
Mhm.
discriminating, exclusive, and what was the third word?
Inequitable.
Inequitable.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So, because if you know what these terms mean, and of course we could talk about that, but whatever.
That's another podcast.
Yeah,
Because hey, and here's the thing, on this podcast, we don't shy away from that. I mean, because this is Christ, culture, and the kooky. All right. Because we enjoy it all on this podcast. And all of those have gone in different directions. But staying with Cruel Logic, there's just so much good stuff in this. And see, one of the things that I like about it is, on this podcast, I like to say no more straw men, no straw men. I don't like straw men, as
yeah,
not only as someone who has been a teacher, right, and both in the public and private sector, but just to be intellectually honest and intellectually um, open. It doesn't do me any good. And this is something that pastors do a lot, that I notice, as they set up the
yeah,
straw man and then they knock it down, and it makes them seem like they're this wise and sage thing. But the problem is that's a straw man, and all you chose were the caricature of your opponent, and then you chose your arguments selectively. And that's what I love about what you're doing here, because some of the arguments, you almost feel like the victim's going to get away,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah,
Like I said,
yeah, and then
there's some good points in some of these
mhm,
viewpoints. Absolutely, yeah,
mhm. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, and then you're like, and then it's the spider with the fly on the web, you know. It's nope, sorry, you're still gonna be
um,
eaten.
yeah. Straw men are boring to me. It's just,
Mhm,
yeah.
mhm.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And,
Well, I
and when I hear
mean,
straw men about Christians, it's just like, oh, this
mhm,
is just so boring. Really,
mhm,
this is what you accept. It's
mhm.
like, come
Yeah.
on. And we shouldn't do the same. We shouldn't do it in reverse to atheists either. But I'll tell you what, though, this is why another one of the components that I actually bring out in the novel is why so many Christians do lose their faith because
Mm,
they're not being effectively equipped by their pastors and their whatever their churches and such, and they're
mhm,
going to college and they're getting exposed to stuff that they've never heard of before, and because there's a
mhm,
lot of sense to it, then
mhm,
they're not equipped to deal with it. For example, Bart Ehrman is the quintessential New Testament scholar who's an apostate, and he's very
mhm,
popular, and a lot of his stuff is taught in the colleges and stuff because he's a good writer and he's a good communicator and he's a Christian, not Christian, he's a biblical scholar, right? But he's an
right.
unbeliever and he attacks the Bible. And he makes some good arguments on the surface in terms of, he has some rhetorical tricks and stuff. But my point is a lot of the things, some of the facts he'll point out are actually true, but they're
Mhm,
shocking and they're scary because Christians have been taught not to accept that thinking. For example, whether it's received texts that he goes a lot into textual criticism where, hey, if you look at it, there's a lot of variations between a lot of the manuscripts that we have, and some of them are very significant, and they do change the meaning at times.
mhm,
Many Christian apologists will argue it doesn't change the Christian faith substantially, but if you're honest, there are verses that I found like it could mean it doesn't make Christianity right or wrong, but it definitely will be the opposite of what you thought it meant. There's a lot of
mhm,
those textual examples, but what are Christians told by their churches and the pastors? Like, no, all that's just been figured out. It's just trust it. It's perfect. There's no flaws. But the truth is there are flaws in the text we have, and that doesn't mean it's not the word of God. But because they think that, and they're being taught to think of this scientific precision and perfection that the Bible just doesn't simply claim to have.
mhm,
There's this concept then means when they hear these you know troubling facts about the transmission of the biblical text, they're true. I mean,
mhm,
even great Christian apologists like James White, who defend the Bible, will admit, all the problems with the textual problems. But there's a way to understand that where it's not the
mhm,
problem that you may worry it is if you understand the nature of inspiration, biblical inspiration, rather than this false picture that no, every word in every English word in the
mhm.
Bible is exactly perfect and scientifically exact. And
Yeah.
so that's my point is that a lot of the stuff there's truth in a lot of it, but because it's been ignored, or it's just like don't deal with evolution. Oh, evolution is just monkey to man. That's ridiculous. They're not equipped to really deal with, and there's some good arguments that evolutionists can make. And if you're never introduced to them, you face them, you're not equipped to handle them. And that's what I see happening a lot.
Yeah, it's like Mike Heiser's example that he would give when he was master's, when he was getting his PhD and he was teaching undergraduate classes that, when they would get into the issue of what does it mean to be the image bearer of God.
Yeah.
And and here he is, he's a Bible believing Christian, but he can destroy you just because he challenges your interpretation of what it means to be an image bearer.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
again, you don't have a strong, foundation in that. We just matter of fact, today this is one of my two interview days where I did an interview prior to this interview, and it was with Stephen Atkerson, who's with the New Testament Reformation, and he's advocating for the return to a New Testament style church where small home base, those types of. But one of the things that we were arguing, or not arguing, but we were discussing, was that one of the reasons why we run into this issue with Christians, especially young Christians, is that because of we go to churches where we we give ourselves over to the pastor, right? And we trust the pastor that he's going to give us what we need to know instead of getting that information ourselves. In the episode that I recorded last week, where we started our spiritual warfare series, is one of the things that I was telling the listeners, you've got to get in there and you've got to do the push-ups. You've got to go read your word. You've got to go get physically fit. That's one of the first things you do in basic training, is you've got to get into the word. You've got to read the word. You've got to, and then the thing is once you get into that word and you have that base, now you can go and answer those questions. And I think what I love is, yes, the protagonist in this story is a lapsed Jew, but he had a father who, good, bad, and indifferent, and again, I'm not going to go into it, at least instilled a lot of that in him.
Yes, exactly.
Hoping that one day, hoping of all hopes that his son would
His
continue the
father's not a
tradition.
hero or a great guy, but he's not completely evil either. Exactly.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's
And
my understanding, is that, even though I believe the biblical description of, oh, look at that, it's got the um even though I believe the biblical description that we are inherently evil, our nature is, that doesn't mean, and totally depraved, that doesn't
Mhm,
mean that we are as bad as we can be. And it doesn't
mhm,
mean that everything is completely the most evil it can be. But does mean we are thoroughly saturated with our evil and it affects everything.
mhm.
And therefore, where was I going with this? What were you talking about? I forgot.
The Jewish father.
Oh, right, right. So my point is that, yeah, I'll have good guys and bad guys, but
Mhm,
bad guys are not all bad and good guys are not all good, and that doesn't mean truth is relative, and it doesn't mean we're not sinful. It just
yeah.
means that life is more complex. In fact, that's another problem with, I think, a lot of Christians. They have this mentality, black and white mentality of, apart from the theological truth that we are all evil, and that children of God, though, are redeemed, right? So there is a
Mhm,
difference, but they tend to separate things with absolutes, like, no, they're all evil, and that, Christians are all good type of it's a mentality. Obviously they're not
right.
thinking that literally, but that's how they sort of see the world, and not recognizing that, well, actually there's a lot of bad Christian people, but that doesn't mean Christianity's, if you face that truth, there's a lot of bad Christian people, and I can tell you that because I've
Mhm,
experienced the badness of them,
mhm,
toward me. Um, but that
mhm,
doesn't mean the faith itself is failing, right? In the same
mhm.
way, you can acknowledge there's goodness that evil people can actually come. Like Jesus said, even, what is it? Even the evil people take care of their children, right? That type of thing.
Right,
And
yes.
so,
Yeah, those of you being
so
evil, even you give your child a loaf of bread when they're hungry, right? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So I don't have any absolute characters. My Christians are not
Yeah.
all good and atheists are all bad. No, that's not the case.
Yeah, yeah. And again, like I keep, guys, you need to go out, you need to buy this book. You really need to support this 100%. And if it's ever made into a film, you need to go and support it as well, because it's going to be incredible.
But
Um,
beware, it is not rated G. It is not
no,
family friendly.
and I was going
Now,
there. Yes.
I wrote about this in my book Hollywood Worldviews and such. You have, if you do not accurately depict evil, your redemption that you're offering in your story will have no power. So there's a lot of evil in there. Now, I try to avoid excessive descriptions and all that kind of stuff, and I do try to be a little bit nuanced, or shall we say creative, so it's not all explicit. By no means is it explicit, but I do deal with a lot of different evil, and so it's tough for some people. So just be aware that,
Yeah, I definitely
yeah,
would not advise letting um
your children read
perhaps
this.
your children read it. Don't let that no, that what, even just the subject, don't do that. Definitely PG-13, if not R. And it's but one of the things, and we're gonna start wrapping up here pretty soon. But one of the things that I really appreciated about it was the fact that it didn't go the direction that a lot of Christian novels go. where
In what way?
there's for one, I liked the redemption element. Okay, I did like that, and I don't want to go into
Oh, you
it
mean
because I
like
don't
the
want to
person
ruin.
doesn't pray to accept Christ at a church
Yes,
led by a
yes, yes,
pastor? Yeah. In fact, my
yes, yes,
pastor in this story, the pastor I have show up is actually a woke pastor
yes, yes.
who's
Well, and
not a good
then
person.
no, he's
No,
not
he's
a
a
good
nice
person at all.
person.
Yes.
He's a nice person, but he's not a biblical
Yes.
Christian, shall we say.
Well, and that's what I'm saying is because I think if you had gone that direction, honestly, it would have been insulting. And again, I don't want to go into it because I don't want to ruin the ending for people. But because and I'm gonna be honest with you guys, the ending, chef's kiss. Okay, it is superb. And it is definitely not how you expect it to end at
And
all.
just because the truth is made clear to the reader in a story doesn't mean everybody accepts it.
Right.
So a
Right.
tragedy, for example, is still a moral story, because a tragedy is when the person doesn't accept redemption, and they're judged for it, or they die, or whatever.
Mhm.
They suffer because of it. But that's just as much a moral message, isn't it? Because you're telling
Mhm.
people, look, if you don't receive the truth, it has consequences on your life as well. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's more reflective of reality, We all know when I just recently buried my mom and
Mm, sorry to hear that.
and thank you, thank you. I mean very recently, last Friday.
Oh,
And but what one of the reasons why I'm even standing here talking to you is because I know that she was a Christian, right? And not only do I know that, but her faith challenged my faith
mm,
on a regular basis.
cool.
I mean, so yeah, so it's one of those things where I know, she's in heaven. I'm going to see her someday. So it definitely brings to life the scripture that Paul says that we do not mourn like those who have no hope. I have that hope, but I have been to funerals where that was in question. Where were they, in their faith, or did they even have Christ? And you see that, and you see that tragic tale of, you see the people that are around them, you see the people that are mourning them, and you have that doubt, and you're right. And I think that's why I like the fact of the realism of this book. I like that I like the realism of how they speak. I like the realism of the trauma that some of the characters have suffered and have to face on the regular basis. And it colors their worldview, and it colors how they interact with other characters in the book. I just think you did a very good job in that. If I can be that, I'm not
Thanks.
trying to be condescending, but yeah, I really do. I think you did a very good job in that. And
Cool.
as someone who likes the written word and loves reading, I read this in about a week, and was just, I mean, I didn't want to put it down, and so
Cool.
I again, I highly recommend people going out there, get the book. You will be surprised by the ending. You will love the debates in the book. You will end up loving Charles Cullen. You
In
will,
a way.
uh,
Well, kind of like
in a
Hannibal
way.
Lecter. It's like,
Yeah.
he's kind of
Yes.
cool, but I know I shouldn't like that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You kind of feel guilty. You're like, ooh,
Yeah.
what's wrong with me? I really like this
Yeah.
guy. Yeah, but it's really good. I can't say enough about it. And I just, I want to thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me,
Like I
Joe.
said,
It's
you're a
been
big
great.
hero of mine. You're a big hero of mine. And I hope maybe someday you and I will get to meet face to face. If not, we'll see each other in glory. And but again, Brian, why don't we end the show with let people know where they can find you,
Yeah,
let
sure.
people know what you're currently working on, just give us the lowdown.
Sure. Godawa.com is my website, and on there you find the Cruel Logic book. And I actually have you mentioned pictures on the back of the novel. Well, I actually casted the entire novel, and I've got pictures of all the cast. which if you like that kind of thing, some people don't, but some people do, like myself.
Mhm.
So I actually did cast all of the characters in Cruel Logic, and you can find that at Godawa.com and sign up for my website there. I mean, my email list, and you'll get all kinds of new insider information and stuff. But my books are all exclusively at Amazon, paperback, Kindle, audiobook, and large print. Cruel Logic is there. So, you could just go directly to Amazon and search for Cruel Logic. You'll see all the little explanation of the book and all the options you can get it at. And I try to price them at as low a price as possible. And so hopefully, you'll find that worth your money.
Yeah. Well, tell people about your other books too, because
Oh, that's a
the
whole other.
people
You got to
that
have me on for.
okay, well, you know what? You know what? I'll take you up on that. I'll take you up on that.
Seriously.
Let's get you on here. Yeah, let's
Because
do
they're
it. Let's do
Bible
it.
novels of the supernatural, like you mentioned, Michael Heiser. So it's basically the Michael
Yeah.
Heiser worldview of the supernatural component in the Bible, spiritual warfare like you've never seen it. This isn't Frank Peretti thing with demons of lust and stuff. This is a higher level reality
Right.
in the Bible, and I've got tons of them, and they're all bestsellers. So
There you go.
yeah,
There you
let's
go.
talk about that next time.
Well, yeah, no, that deal.
Okay.
Believe it or not, it's actually my goal for this podcast to get you, Judd, and Doug on one time, just to have a conversation about that worldview, for sure. Because right now I'm doing Judd's, and we'll shout out to Judd. I'll be interviewing him in May, but I'm doing his preternatural morphology course right now, and it's just blowing my mind.
Cool.
my head hurts. But anyways, well, hey, again, man, Brian, it's wonderful getting to talk to you, getting to talk to you about your book. Guys, again, the book is Cruel Logic, The Philosopher Killer. Go out there and buy it. But with that, I want to say thank you to all of you who are listening. We've hit 1,000 views. We couldn't have done it without you guys. Keep hitting that like button. Keep subscribing to the podcast. Keep supporting this. We'll keep going as long as y'all do. But with that, may God bless you. May he keep you. May he shine his countenance upon you, and may he give you rest. God bless.
Amen.